The January 29th, 2026 incident at Fremont High School should have been remembered as a defining moment when a teenage boy displayed real courage and composure in the face of chaos and hostility. Instead, it became a textbook case study in how adults, politicians, school officials, police leadership, city government, and the broader community completely failed the youth of Nebraska. Video from multiple independent angles captured the sequence with crystal clarity. A female student protester ran directly into the path of a moving red SUV, driven by another juvenile. The driver had no realistic chance to avoid the collision. His vehicle was surrounded by an angry, threatening mob yelling insults, physically hitting the car, and stealing the Trump 2024 flag. The young driver briefly stopped, exchanged words, then made the rational decision to drive away and remove himself from immediate danger. Police citations later confirmed he faced no charges for hitting or assaulting anyone, only for leaving the scene, an action that was entirely reasonable and justified given the hostile crowd. This teenage driver did exactly what any sensible person would do in that moment. He should have been celebrated as a hero. Instead, he was vilified by the very adults who were supposed to protect and guide him. The adults who failed miserably. The adults in positions of authority let this young man down in every possible way. Politicians, Governor Jim Pillen, Senators Pete Ricketts and Deb Fischer, Representatives Mike Flood, Don Bacon, and Adrian Smith, along with Omaha Mayor John Ewing Jr., issued coordinated statements within hours that falsely portrayed the driver as the aggressor who hit or assaulted a peaceful protester. They had access to the same video evidence as everyone else. They watched the student run into the roadway. They saw the mob surrounding and threatening the SUV, yet they chose to repeat the same scripted lies about political violence and disrupting a peaceful protest. Their coordinated messaging, released in a tight 24-hour window with nearly identical language, was not leadership. It was performative theater designed to signal allegiance to certain political interests while throwing a Nebraska teenager under the bus. They never corrected the record once the facts became clear. Their silence after the police citations was deafening and shameful. Fremont school officials, including the superintendent and principal, allowed and actively facilitated a protest on school grounds during school hours. Faculty and staff helped students make signs in classrooms, discuss protesting as part of Americanism lessons, and were physically present outside, supervising the event as it spilled into the street. They created an emotionally charged environment, put students in harm's way, and then tried to distance themselves by calling it non-school sponsored. This was a blatant failure of their duty to protect children. They prioritized political activism over student safety, and then abandoned the young people when things went wrong. Fremont Police Chief Jeff Elliott and the department responded to the scene, but ultimately issued only minor citations while failing to thoroughly investigate the role of the adults who organized and supervised the protest. They allowed the false narrative pushed by politicians and media to linger without pushing back with the full facts. Their handling sent a terrible message. Adults in power will not protect a young man who stands up to a hostile crowd if it conflicts with prevailing political winds. Mayor Dev Sukram of Fremont remained completely silent throughout the entire episode. The mayor of the city where this happened offered no public leadership, no support for the driver, no call for calm, and no accountability for the school's involvement. His absence spoke volumes about the lack of backbone in local leadership. These adults, whether through active lies, deliberate silence, or gross negligence, failed the teenage driver, failed the female student who ran into traffic, and failed every child in the Fremont school system. They prioritized political correctness, donor interests, and avoiding controversy over the safety and well-being of their own community's youth. The teenage driver as a true hero, the young man behind the wheel of the red SUV showed genuine courage that day. He drove into a highly charged situation where emotions were running extremely high. He briefly got out of his vehicle to confront the crowd directly. When the situation turned threatening and dangerous, he made the smart, level-headed decision to drive away rather than escalate or stay and risk physical harm. In an era when many adults cower, virtue signal, or remain silent in the face of mobs, this teenager stood his ground, asserted himself, and then protected himself. He deserves to be remembered and celebrated as a hero, a young American who refused to back down when confronted by a crowd supporting causes that many in his community strongly oppose. His actions represented the kind of backbone and common sense that Nebraska was built on. Instead of praise, he received condemnation from the very people who should have defended him. The female student who ran into the street should not be personally vilified. She was a teenager caught up in an emotionally charged atmosphere created and supervised by adults. The real failure belongs to the grown-ups who put her in that position and then abandoned both students when the consequences arrived. A tragic missed opportunity for real accountability. This incident presented a perfect opportunity for Fremont and the state of Nebraska to examine serious issues: the role of outside organizations and school staff in organizing protests on school grounds, the influence of pro-illegal immigration groups, and the failure of adults to maintain order and protect children. Instead, the adults conspired through silence, false narratives, and selective enforcement to protect those interests. They failed to investigate the school's facilitation of the protest. They failed to hold enablers and outside organizations accountable. They failed to stand up for American students and American sovereignty in their own community. It will take brave young men like the driver of the red SUV, willing to stand up to mobs, illegal immigration pressures, demographic replacement, and cowardly adult leadership to begin making real changes in Nebraska and across the country. The pathetic, spineless response from Fremont's leaders, the police chief, superintendent, mayor, city council, school board, and politicians, sent a disastrous message to every student. We will not protect you if doing so conflicts with our political correctness, donor relationships, or fear of controversy. The teenage driver should be celebrated as a hero who showed courage when adults showed cowardice. Instead, the adults let him down. They let down every real American kid in Fremont. They failed their school, their town, and their country. They exposed themselves as frauds who prioritize special interests, political narratives, and personal comfort over the future of Nebraska's children. Nebraska's youth are watching this failure. The adults in charge failed this time. The next generation will remember, and they will not repeat the same cowardice. Conclusion: one teen's courage, Nebraska's shame. How adults betrayed two students and exposed their own cowardice in Fremont. The Fremont High School anti-ICE protest incident of January 29, 2026, stands as one of the most shameful episodes in recent Nebraska history, not because of what two teenagers did, but because of how every layer of adult authority completely failed them. A teenage boy driving a red SUV showed more courage and common sense in a single afternoon than the entire political, educational, and media establishment of Nebraska could muster. He faced a hostile mob, briefly confronted it, then wisely removed himself from danger when the situation turned threatening. He did nothing wrong. He should have been celebrated as a young man willing to stand up to a crowd supporting causes many in his community oppose. Instead, he was turned into a villain by a coordinated campaign of lies. Governor Jim Pillen, Senators Pete Ricketts and Deb Fischer, Representatives Mike Flood, Don Bacon, and Adrian Smith, along with local officials including Omaha Mayor John Ewing Jr., issued nearly identical statements within hours that falsely accused the driver of political violence, assault, and hitting a peaceful protester. They had the video evidence. They ignored it. They never corrected the record. Fremont school administrators and faculty facilitated a protest on school grounds during school hours, allowed signs to be made in classrooms, and supervised an event that spilled into the street, then tried to wash their hands of responsibility. The police department issued minor citations, but failed to hold the adults who created the dangerous environment accountable. Mayor Dev Sukram stayed silent. The local media, led by Mike Flood's own news channel Nebraska, and echoed by Omaha anchors like Brian Mostre on WOWT, repeated the falsehoods on air for days. All of these adults had the same video. All of them watched the student run into the SUV. All of them saw the mob's aggression. Yet they chose the lie. They chose to protect political narratives, donor interests, cheap labor lobbies, and their own careers over the truth and the well-being of two Nebraska teenagers. This was not leadership. It was cowardice. It was fraud. It was a complete betrayal of the children they claimed to serve. The teenage driver of the red SUV did what the adults refused to do. He stood his ground and protected himself. In doing so, he exposed the rot at the heart of Nebraska's political and media class, a class more interested in appeasing special interests, investment schemes, and demographic pressures than in defending their own young people. Nebraska's adults failed this test. They failed the driver. They failed the female student. They failed every child watching. The courage shown by one teenager that day should shame every politician, school official, police leader, and journalist who abandoned him. The real story of Fremont is not about two students in a chaotic moment. It is about a generation of adults who chose lies, silence, and self-interest over truth, courage, and responsibility. History will remember who stood up and who ran away.